Yeah, I didn't think it was different. I just thought the girls played with the girls, the guys played with the guys. But in essence, I thought it was baseball. The ball's coming in, you're swinging the same way, you have the same setup, have the same fielding motion. To me, I was playing baseball, but I was playing with the girls because that's what we do. But I felt like a real baseball player. I had the big league chew packs. I had the bazooka gum.
That's 1996 Olympic softball star Danny Tyler, recalling her first days in softball while growing up a diehard fan of baseball's Chicago Cubs. Danny grew up in the 1980s, during the early years of the era when fast-pitch softball rapidly built out its pipeline for kids like Danny. From community youth leagues to school and travel teams to opportunities to play in college on scholarship. This was the first era when men's baseball and women's fast-pitch softball paired up formally, started to appear together as a matched set of sports, one for the gals, one for the fellas. Before that, it didn't make sense because women's fast-pitch softball had a much more natural pairing with men's fast-pitch softball. Last time we heard the story of Lorene Ramsey, star pitcher for the Caterpillar Dieselettes and then the Pekinlets. The Dieselettes used to play doubleheaders with Caterpillar's men's team, the Diesels. Over time, that changed. Today, the pairing off of men's baseball and women's fast-pitch softball and the resulting temptation to conflate those sports. This story starts with a breakup. This is Uningrained. I'm Steve Hendershot. Uningrained is a show about blind spots, invisible ideas, and hidden assumptions, about identifying them, evaluating them, and when it makes sense, addressing them. This season, baseball is the national pastime, central to America's culture and identity. So when we say that softball is baseball for girls, are we boxing women out of an essential piece of American life? Come along and decide for yourself. And please, subscribe, check out all of the bonus Uningrained content on Substack, and tell your friends. Thank you. This show only works with your help.
You have come to fight as 3 16-inch softball players. And 3 16-inch softball players you are. What would you do without freedom? Will you fight?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
100%. We're here.
And we will fight.
I'm standing on a ball field in Chicago near Lake Michigan, walking distance from the site of the hotel where a Major League Baseball player got shot by an obsessed fan in 1949, inspiring the novel and film The Natural. But I'm not here for baseball. I'm here for the Mean Machine,
Mean Machine.
a 16-inch slow-pitch softball team in Chicago's Theater League, a 50-year-old rec league whose alumni include actors John Malkovich, Gary Sinise, and Michael Keaton. Only in the Theater League do you get pregame speeches like this. And by the way, the coach, Django Baker, is wearing a sparkly blue wig and holding aloft a toy pony as he exhorts his team Braveheart style.
Would you be willing to trade all the softball games from this one to the championship game for one chance? Just one chance to come back here to Diamond One, to spank and take them, and tell our enemies that they may take our last regular season game of the year, but they shall never take our freedom!
Good job.
16-inch softball is a quintessential Chicago thing. It's awesome, it's weird. The ball is huge, it's like a grapefruit. One of the oddest things about the idea of softball as baseball for girls is the notion that people with smaller hands are well served by a ball that's 25% larger than a baseball. Well, the 16-inch softball is 25% larger than a regulation softball. Some fielders wear gloves, some don't, and throwing the ball can be a challenge. Here's Melissa Casting, once a scholarship college fast-pitch player who later transitioned to the 16-inch slow-pitch game.
Yeah, no. When I first picked it up, I was like, I can't hold this. I can't hold this with one hand. I can't throw it normally. What am I going to do? Because it's significantly bigger. And my hand is naturally smaller. So I was like, so I had to relearn how to throw the ball. So I almost throw like shot put.
The Theater League started in the mid-1970s amidst a broader boom for recreational slow-pitch softball across the country, a boom that coincided with a serious decline in the men's fast-pitch game. Most of that surge was not 16-inch, and that was no coincidence, because you cannot hit a 16-inch softball to the moon. And hitting the ball to the moon was very much a part of what made slow pitch so suddenly popular. See, slow pitch softball had been around for a while by the 1970s. The thing that was new back then was science bats. Bats made of aluminum and metal alloys. A lot of dudes learned very quickly that with a little help from technology, they could hit the ball a long way. Except for one problem. Standing in their way in both baseball and fast-pitch softball were pitchers. The core differentiator for slow-pitch softball compared to baseball and fast-pitch is that the pitch is easy to hit. The pitching is still underhand like fast-pitch, but instead of getting whipped in there at the speed of light, the ball just floats gently in from the sky, and you stand there with your science bat and wait for it, and then take your best rip. Metal bats also invaded baseball and fast-pitch softball to various extents, but they did not immediately translate into a ton of additional home runs because, pitchers. But slow-pitch softball, this was a revolution.
I can hit a 12-inch ball all the way out in the middle of nowhere.
Christy Bonstow works at Second City, the famed Chicago comedy institution, and she's also played 16-inch softball in the Theater League for 17 years. She does love hitting home runs in conventional slow pitch, but she digs 16-inch too. It has its own unique character and challenges.
I cannot hit a 16-inch ball that far. It is massive and heavy, and I can't get under it. So you have to learn how to place your hits.
It's chill, but it's not like too chill.
16-inch softball, especially played by a bunch of actors, seems like it would be a goofy thing, but it's actually really competitive and super fun.
Many millions of people played slow pitch during its heyday in the 70s and 80s, pulling lots of players from men's fast pitch and contributing to that sport's decline. Culturally, it was a clear sign that men's and women's softball, paired up for decades, were growing apart. This is the same period when women's fast pitch was trying to carve out its own identity as a high school and college sport. Fast pitch wanted to be elite, Olympic caliber. And while there were elite slow pitch players and leagues out there, and still are, the big slow pitch boom back then was mostly casual. Friends and colleagues getting together after work for some competitive fun. That was true of regular slow pitch leagues as well as the Chicago variants with the big 16-inch ball.
People smoked on base while they were playing. People would hold a beer as they were running. And that has sort of backed away, and it's become a kind of a kinder league than it used to be. But all in all, I think it's really just a way for people to come together and have fun and sit outside and not be thinking about the next Steppenwolf audition or the next Goodman audition or the next commercial audition or whatever it is.
This league is beautiful. The tradition and community are beautiful. Not professional, not elite, but beautiful. And listen, the level of play is high. There are lots of accomplished athletes in the diamond, and lots of people are very invested in being excellent at 16-inch softball. And that's not limited to the Theater League.
Some of the most terrifying and amazing women you will ever see play 16-inch softball in the suburbs. And they are beasts. I mean, it's not even comparable to what you're seeing here. It's like a completely different sport. It's incredible. It's amazing. It's an art.
But it's also a far cry from the sort of Olympic-level, pro-caliber sport that is elite fast-pitch softball. Former elite fast-pitch players who migrate to 16-inch softball later in life have to come to terms with the differences. Here's Melissa Casting.
Here, 16-inch is a lot more relaxed. There is competitiveness, and I am on a more competitive team in the league. But there's a lot of laughs on the field, jokes on the field. You come off and you've got people who are drinking or having fun and just hanging out. But it's definitely a different vibe. You don't have to be as serious or as locked in that much as to fast pitch. It was like, no, you have to be ready to go at all times.
I'm not here to rag on slow pitch, whether 12-inch or 16-inch. Far from it. They're great, and in pockets of the country, they're played at such a high level. But the vibe is different, the game is very different, and in the 70s and 80s, the beer league version of slow pitch, propelled by aluminum bats and also aluminum cans, grew so immensely popular that it contributed to the breakup of elite men's and women's softball. That's what's relevant to our Uningrained investigation. More than 80 years after softball's invention, women's fast pitch was suddenly uncoupled from the men's game. And that happened right around the time baseball, after more than a century of calling its own shots, suddenly needed a +1. The pairing off of men's and women's sports was a full-on phenomenon back in the early 70s, at least at the high school and college levels. It was the nature of the Title IX compliance gold rush, where the name of the game was proportionality.
If a woman or a girl, a college student, indicated that she was interested in playing a certain sport and she had the ability, you either had to let her play on a men's sport, on a men's team, or you had to make available a woman's team.
That's women's baseball scholar Jennifer Ring. Schools worked to ensure that there was a proportionate number of overall male and female sports opportunities. Sometimes that was straightforward. You got a boys' basketball team, add girls' basketball. Sometimes it was really hard. Football teams involve a ton of kids, a ton of boys, and there was no girls' version, so what do? You make weird choices to make the numbers work, like building up girls' volleyball while slashing boys' volleyball. Girls' high school volleyball grew 15x in a decade, and at the same time, volleyball went from a top 10 sport for high school boys in 1971 to practically non-existent a decade later. No one decided volleyball was bad for boys. This was just brute force, blunt instrument proportionality. School-based fast-pitch softball took off during this era. The number of high schools offering girls fast-pitch softball went from fewer than 400 in 1971 to more than 5,000 in 1974, and kept growing from there. College softball also took off, with lots of big schools adding the sport, and the NCAA taking over from the women's-only AIAW in 1982, which meant that women's sports was moving closer to the center of the athletic department, and the devotees of the physical education movement were losing control over women's sports. So there's also a decoupling of fast-pitch softball from the PE movement. Here's Victoria Jackson, a women's sports historian at Arizona State.
This is the point at which women's sports move from PE into the formal athletic department. It's also when we see a lot of the kind of higher profile universities move their women's teams from the region system of the AIAW to the men's conference system. These women, particularly at the elite institutions, and then once the conference change has happened, understand that it's inevitable, that ultimately the AIAW will fold. And once the NCAA launches championships for women, they will have taken over. And that's what happens.
So fast pitch grows rapidly, but to be clear, it wasn't like softball had a limousine ride to the glamorous inner circle of American sports. Softball did not immediately win over the hearts and minds of casual sports fans. There was a pretty serious attempt at a pro softball league in the late 1970s, involving Joan Joyce from the Breakettes, as well as Billie Jean King and Dennis Murphy, the entrepreneur behind successful upstart basketball and hockey leagues. That league contracted after its first season and folded after 4. And rather than add softball or otherwise expand their women's sports offerings, a lot of schools chose a different option. No, not a careful consideration of the sweep and cultural significance of American sport, followed by a painstaking effort to determine how to graft women into the rich fullness of that experience. Instead, the other preferred option back then was to do nothing and just ignore Title IX.
There's an initial push, but then there's stagnation through the 1980s during the Reagan years. So the bat signal goes out from the Reagan White House that you are not going to be investigated if you're not complying with Title IX in sports.
The bat signal she mentions comes in the form of the Department of Education's response to a Supreme Court case related to Title IX in 1984.
That signal gets out to these administrators who are reluctant to do anything to expand opportunities for women in sport in the first place. And so there's a delay. There's an almost 20-year delay, especially in sports like softball. It is a story that takes 15 years. It takes us in from the early 80s into the mid 1990s, where you finally see kind of nationwide teams.
We'll come back to that 20-year delay, but for now, the important thing is that the softball pipeline gets built. This developmental pathway from youth leagues and travel ball all the way through high school and college. It works. Kids flow all the way through the program, and stars emerge on the other side. Here's Danny Tyler again, and then national champion Jenny Dalton-Hill.
The girls went to the softball league and the boys went to the baseball league. So that was probably, third grade? When you got to about third grade, you split off. You moved out of t-ball. The girls went to softball. The guys went to baseball. I was a pretty good volleyball, basketball, and softball player, and it probably wasn't until my sophomore year that I really had to decide what was I going to move forward in playing college. So I played club volleyball, and I did travel basketball, and I did travel softball. I loved all of it. But I started to realize as colleges started sending letters and from different accolades that, okay, softball, this is probably where I need to go. And I did love playing it all the time. I received scholarship offers in all three, and I chose softball.
I played in Southern California where I grew up. I started playing at the age of 8, and I played softball. I was fortunate that softball was something that Little League offered. I was given an opportunity to play for a travel softball team after that. And in that was recognized by the head coach at the University of Arizona. And while playing at the University of Arizona, won 3 national championships, which has propelled me and the rest of my life into a very sporty world that has given me opportunities in a lot of different ways.
So all of this academic institutional scaffolding is built for softball, even though it doesn't quite work its way all the way through the system. Momentum stalls, and the number of high school softball programs plateaus through the 80s. Also, big swaths of the NCAA, universities like Texas, Wisconsin, and Stanford, not to mention the Southeastern Conference, the SEC, did not add softball in the 70s or 80s. But the great pairing off wasn't yet complete. Soon, the next wave hit, and that might have been the most influential of all, the Olympic Games. In 1991, the International Olympic Committee was feeling some heat related to the game's gender imbalance. It made a rule that any new Olympic sport had to involve women. And while that didn't technically apply to baseball, which had debuted in 1984, the IOC in 1991 also announced that it would add softball to the program for the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. This was the pair-off that led to the completion of the pipeline.
A lot of people now that experience the wild popularity of college softball believe that everything modern day popularity started with college softball, and that is not true. Everything that you see modern day that's popular in our sport started with its addition to the 96 Olympic slate. That was the turning point. That's what put it into the category of Olympic sport. Then it became a sort of a natural addition and a desirable addition to colleges to add that as a women's sport.
That's longtime pro softball executive Sherry Kempf. And it's true. The U.S. softball team's gold medal performance in 96 was a watershed moment. Here's Danny Tyler, a member of that team while a college student at Drake University.
It was literally a dream, Steve. When I look back, I feel like it was a different life. You know, you're getting endorsements. For the first time, we were on TV. After the Olympics, when I went back to Drake my last year, every weekend I would fly out and I would do speaking engagements and camps and clinics. And I mean, we were so busy. People just loved us. And I couldn't figure out why, because we're just playing. We're having fun together. We got to go on Oprah. We got to go on the Today Show. You know, all these really amazing, cool things. And then to top it off, I got to throw a first pitch out at Wrigley, which to me, being a Cubs fan, that was the icing on the cake of just a wonderful, incredible experience.
So now softball was really rolling, with momentum that trickled down to college and high school softball. Here's Sherry Kempf again.
Once softball became an Olympic sport and got into that category of Olympic sport, collegiately, it was just an arms race to see who could spend the most on stadiums and who could put these teams together and really compete.
All those universities I mentioned, Wisconsin, Stanford, Texas, the entire SEC, those and more suddenly added softball. And the high school softball plateau evaporated too. Participation increased 67% between 1990 and 2000 as the number of schools with teams increased by 50%. So the great pairing off between men's baseball and women's fast-pitch softball happened in 3 acts. One, Little League, sparked by the Little League lawsuits. Then high schools and universities, sparked by Title IX. And finally, the Olympics, sparked by an IOC commitment to expanding women's participation. Softball grew in each instance, happy for the newfound attention and resources, and also not really arguing for the conflation of their sport with men's baseball. Baseball, through this era, was mostly indifferent, uninvolved. There was no meet cute in the pairing off of men's baseball and women's softball, just a series of board meetings and an arranged marriage. Okay, we are preparing to turn a corner on Uningrained, moving on from the history lesson to the contemporary landscape, and then asking whether the ingrained status quo needs adjusting. Before we do, I want to address and then put to bed one of the key questions for our investigation this season. It's an invisible assumption that's easy to make if you've grown up in the era of the pair-off between men's baseball and women's fast-pitch softball. But I also think it's pretty straightforward to knock down, so let's do that, because I think that's going to enable us to focus on some other, more interesting questions as we go forward. The question I want to answer now is whether fast-pitch softball can literally be considered baseball for girls. The idea that it's just as alike as women's basketball, soccer, hockey, tennis, golf, and so on. It's the same sport the men play, plus minor variations to accommodate female athletes. It just happens to have a different name. We have covered a lot of these points along the way this season, but often one at a time, tucked inside a broader story. So let me now go point by point to argue for the side where I've landed, which is that these sports are far too different to be considered a logical men's and women's pair. So, here goes. First, the size of the ball. A women's basketball is 3% different than a men's ball, plus it's smaller, which makes sense to accommodate for different hand sizes. A conventional 12-inch softball, on the other hand, is 25% bigger than a baseball. That's an enormous difference, and it's bigger than a baseball, not smaller, making it especially challenging for people with smaller hands. There's a history lesson here that almost serves as its own point. Softball wasn't designed to accommodate women. It was designed to be a baseball-like game you could play in smaller spaces. Anyway, we heard on the last episode about the impact of the bigger ball from Janine Lesko-DeCombs, a pitcher in the All-American League.
The ball was too big. I couldn't control it.
Second, the mechanics of the pitching motion. Throwing underhand is substantially different than overhand. It creates a vastly different look for batters when the ball is rising as it approaches instead of dropping. Here's Jenny Dalton-Hill, who played high-level baseball as well as fast-pitch softball.
The bend of the pitches is different. You're going to have to read the ball different. Picking up a pitcher's slot was hard for me because I had never picked up an overhand or a submariner. I had only picked up underhand, which was however long your arm is, that's your release point. So just your perspective of how to execute is different.
A further point on pitching mechanics. The underhanded motion was not and is not designed to uniquely benefit or accommodate women. Men who play fast pitch also pitch this way. And there have been plenty of highly effective women baseball pitchers. We've heard from Isla Borders and Carrie Schuler. Now let's check in with Elise Berger, a starter for the current U.S. women's national team, who also pitches for the men's baseball team at Bard College in New York.
No, in my experience, there's no reason women can't pitch overhand. And in some ways, I think in terms of like flexibility, for example, typically women tend to be a little bit more flexible. And so for a pitcher, that's an important thing. That could even potentially be seen as an advantage for a woman. I'm not going to throw 90 miles, 100 miles an hour, so I'm not going to blow my fastball's not going to blow it by the guys necessarily. I throw hard enough, obviously, to be competitive. But for me, my strength has always been able to locate. So I've always been able to kind of hit my spots really well.
Third point from the third episode, pitching durability. In baseball, the ace takes the mound once every several games and seldom even completes that game. An opposing team can get around the ace pitcher. The top college baseball pitcher selected in this year's Major League Baseball amateur draft, Jackson Flora from Cal Santa Barbara, pitched 19% of his team's innings. The top two pitchers accounted for about a third of the team's total innings. Now compare that to the top college softball pitcher, Nyjah Kennedy from Texas Tech, who herself pitched nearly half of her team's total innings, and the top two pitchers were on the mound for Tech 80% of the time. A defining characteristic of baseball is that the star players don't define the outcome. They're only up to bat once out of every 9 turns, and the ace pitcher is on the bench more often than in the game. That translates to a uniquely unpredictable, egalitarian sport. Softball, in contrast, is much more star-driven. Here's Beth Greenwood, a catcher for the Boston Hunters in the Women's Pro Baseball League, and also a former college baseball pitching coach. And then Morgan Zirkle, a pro softball player for the Chicago Bandits, and a college coach at Marshall University.
I think like a huge difference that honestly we don't even talk about enough, I think sometimes, is just managing a pitching staff from the baseball perspective. Softball, it's really nice. You get to have your ace every single time. And so I think like it's not as much of a puzzle piece of like, okay, we have to figure out how we're going to manage our 4 starters, how we're going to manage this and that. I think for baseball, like you're juggling everything and just trying to figure out making sure that we have arms available? Are they going to be able to throw the next day? Are we going to go back-to-back days? Are we going to have to make sure we get enough rest? Are we making sure we're taking care of our arm care? We're on top of that.
If you have one ace, you can win, your conference tournament in your conference. If you have two aces, you can, really make a run in regionals and the NCAA tournament and all of that.
Fourth point, field dimensions. This one is new and important. In basketball, the overall court size is the same for men and women. The NBA three-point line is a bit longer than in the WNBA, but in college, it's the same. Soccer has no dimensional differences. Neither does ice hockey. Neither does tennis. Golf, you get to tee off a few yards closer to the pin, but not much. But fast-pitch softball? It's baseball in miniature. The dimensions of a full-size baseball diamond, the distance between the bases, is 50% bigger than for a full-size softball diamond. That has an enormous impact on strategy and gameplay. You can get from home to first very quickly in softball, which means tactics like bunting and slap hitting are fundamental. And by the way, the name softball comes from early in the sport's history when different, softer balls were in play. Remember, the first softball was a boxing glove. A modern softball, while somewhat less dense than the baseball, is not soft at all, and elite players can hit one with an exit velocity greater than 90 miles an hour. Now, remember that they're standing 60 feet from home plate, not 90 as in baseball. Of course they're wearing masks. Morgan Zirkle again.
Just reaction time has to be so much quicker defensively. Just today at practice, my third baseman was, 30 feet away from the hitter. And it's a little scary, I don't think baseball third basemen are ever getting scared because they're too close to the batter. And also you make one little wrong move and you don't have time to make up for it. So errors are based more on speed sometimes, and that's how you get a hit versus, being able to bobble the ball, pick it up, and still make a throw across the diamond in baseball that is still getting you an out pretty easily sometimes.
Fifth and final point. Baseball and softball players are unanimous, at least in my reporting, in their belief that these are two different sports. We've heard it from Isla Borders in baseball and also from Morgan.
It is different, and if it's not, then tell the guys to go play it. It's a different game.
I do feel like they're very different games, and I know women play baseball and respect to them for doing that, but I think softball is different.
For me, it's a slam dunk. Baseball and softball are more like tennis and table tennis than versions of tennis for men and women. And yet men's baseball and women's softball continue to get paired up. And in the modern era, for the first time, leaders of these sports are embracing the idea. In 2005, the International Olympic Committee voted to remove both baseball and softball from the Games, starting in 2012. Well, remember that Olympic rule added in 1991? No more men's sports without a women's equivalent? This connection is conjecture on my part, but the timing works. Suddenly, after both sports were bounced from the Olympics, we saw all kinds of collaboration. In 2013, the International Baseball Federation and International Softball Federation, essentially the ambassadors of those sports to the IOC, combined into one organization, the World Baseball Softball Confederation. In 2015, Major League Baseball's Play Ball initiative, aimed at increasing youth participation, included partnerships both with USA Baseball and USA Softball. In 2020, Major League Baseball was the presenting sponsor of the women's national softball team's Olympic training tour. Both baseball and softball were included at the Tokyo Games on a one-off basis because of Japan's love for baseball. Now, women's baseball also gains momentum throughout this period and receives support both from USA Baseball and MLB. We'll get to that later, but I do want to acknowledge that baseball's growing connection to softball didn't mean women's baseball was frozen out. But my point here, and with today's story, is to trace this odd coupling of men's baseball and women's softball, two related but very different sports that for so long had so little to do with one another, until pairing up started to make sense, to serve one particular end or another. On the next episode, we're moving into the present day, and we're going to look at two new pro leagues off to promising starts, one in women's fast-pitch softball and one in men's baseball. Guess which one has Major League Baseball's backing? This episode of Uningrained was reported and produced by me, Steve Hendershot. Graham Gilreath helped me with the music. Nathan McDonald worked his usual visual wizardry. I'll post a list of research links for this episode to our Substack soon. That's uningrained.substack.com. That's the same Substack where you'll also find other posts related to our show, along with a separate podcast called Uningrained Extended Play that features longer, more conversational versions of some of our interviews. Thank you so much for sharing and promoting the show. I deeply appreciate it. Uningrained is a production of Cedar Cathedral Narrative Studio.